I was kneeling on the bathroom floor of a penthouse I didn't belong in, my hands pressed over my ears, sobbing so hard my ribs ached, when my husband's thoughts came through the wall like they always did. Clear, relentless, devastating. He's crying again. I can hear him through the wall. God, the sound of it. Every night for 2 weeks, he locks himself in that bathroom and cries, and I stand out here like a coward with my hand on the doorknob, and I can't make myself turn it. What kind of alpha am I? What kind of husband lets the person he loves most in this world cry alone 15 feet away because he's too afraid of his own feelings to knock? Open the door, Kieran. Open the damn door. Tell him you love him. Tell him you've loved him since the second you saw him. Tell him his scent makes you feel like you've finally come home after 31 years of wandering. Tell him anything. Tell him everything. The doorknob rattled, then stopped. His mind whispered, I can't. If he knows what I feel, if he sees what's underneath, he'll run. Everyone runs. Better to be the cold husband he expects than the desperate, obsessive wreck I actually am. Better to let him think I don't care than to care so much it swallows us both. His footsteps retreated down the hallway. I pressed my forehead against the cold tile and listened to the man I was falling in love with walk away from me for the 100th time, not knowing that I could hear every word he never said. That was 3 weeks before everything ended, before the secret I carried destroyed us, before I learned that hearing someone's heart doesn't mean you know how to save it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Hey, welcome to Moonlit Episodes. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really encourages my work and helps me bring you more stories. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I read every comment. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. My name is Sora Tanaka. I'm 26 years old. I'm an Omega, and until 4 months ago, I was invisible. Not the kind of invisible that teenagers whine about when they don't get enough attention online. The real kind. The kind where you work 3 jobs and still can't afford heat suppressants. The kind where your landlord doesn't bother learning your name because tenants like you cycle in and out with the seasons. The kind where you could disappear tomorrow and the only person who'd notice is the head librarian, and only because she'd need to find someone else to shelve returns on Tuesday nights. I lived in Seattle, above a noodle shop on South King Street. My apartment was the size of a parking space. The walls were thin enough that I knew my neighbor's entire phone schedule, and the radiator worked only when it felt like it, which was never when the temperature dropped below 40. I had a degree in library science from the University of Washington that I'd paid for with student loans I'd be paying off until I died. I had a part-time job at the Seattle Public Library, an early morning shift stocking shelves at a grocery store, and weekend tutoring gigs that paid cash. I had exactly $1,100 in savings, chronic hand tremors from years of bargain bin suppressants that were slowly wrecking my nervous system, and a dead father whose medical bills still arrived in the mail like letters from a ghost. My mother died when I was 14. Ovarian cancer. Fast, brutal, no time for goodbyes. She'd been an Omega, soft and fierce in equal measure, the kind of person who could make you feel safe just by being in the room. Her scent was jasmine and warm cotton, and for years after she was gone, I pressed my face into her old sweaters just to catch the fading trace. My father was a beta, a quiet, gentle man who ran a used bookstore in the International District. He loved my mother in that consuming way that betas sometimes love Omegas, like they're trying to protect something they know the world wants to break. When she died, something in him broke instead. He had a stroke when I was 19. Massive. It left him unable to speak, barely able to move. I dropped out of college to care for him because there was no one else. Sold the bookstore, Watched the money evaporate into hospital bills and care facility fees. Worked every hour I could find and still fell behind. He died on a rainy Tuesday in March, alone, while I was stocking canned goods at the grocery store because I couldn't afford to miss the shift. The facility called my phone. I listened to the voicemail in the back room, standing between pallets of soup, and I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the concrete floor, and I didn't cry because I had used up all my crying years ago. I buried him with a credit card that was already maxed, moved into the noodle shop apartment, started the slow, gray business of surviving alone in a city that didn't know my name. The mind reading started 6 weeks after his death. I was on the bus heading to the library, staring out the window at the rain, when the woman next to me smiled at her phone and I heard, clear as a bell, "If he sends one more passive-aggressive text about the thermostat, I will burn this entire building down." I looked at her. She hadn't moved her lips. She was still smiling. That was the beginning of the end of my sanity. It got worse fast. Emotional spikes transmitted the loudest. Fear, rage, lust, grief. Those came through like someone shouting in my ear. Alphas were the worst. Their pheromones acted as amplifiers, turning their inner thoughts into a broadcast I couldn't shut off. In a room full of agitated alphas, I couldn't think, couldn't function, couldn't breathe through the noise. The grocery store became unbearable. Frustrated shoppers, angry managers, alphas with short tempers, all of them screaming thoughts I didn't want to hear. I started wearing earbuds constantly, playing white noise loud enough to dull the edges. People thought I was rude. I let them think it. Better rude than insane. The library saved me. Something about the concentrated quiet, the focused minds, the gentle hum of people lost in books. It was the only place the noise receded to a manageable whisper. I started volunteering for every extra shift, spending 12-hour days surrounded by shelves and silence, building myself a fortress of pages and Dewey Decimal numbers. But I couldn't hide forever. The suppressants were failing. The cheap ones I could afford were causing tremors in my hands and migraines that lasted days. My heats were getting worse, longer, more brutal. I spent my last one alone in my apartment, with the door locked and a towel stuffed under it to contain my scent, curled in a nest of blankets that smelled like nothing and no one, riding wave after wave of biological need that had nowhere to go. 3 days of fever and aching and a loneliness so profound it felt like being buried alive. Afterward, lying on sweat-soaked sheets, I stared at the water-stained ceiling and did the math. Rent, utilities, student loans, minimum payments on my father's medical debt, groceries, suppressants. The numbers didn't work. They hadn't worked in months. I was drowning in slow motion, and there was no one watching, no one coming, no one who would even notice when the water closed over my head. That was the month the letter arrived. Heavy cream paper, embossed with the Hayashi International logo, addressed to Sora Tanaka, which was strange because no one important knew that name. Inside was a formal inquiry about my maternal lineage. My mother, it turned out, had been born a Tanaka of the Tanaka family, once one of the most respected Japanese-American clans in the Pacific Northwest. Old money, old name, the kind of pedigree that still carried weight in traditional circles even after the fortune was gone. A woman named Mrs. Ito came to my apartment 3 days later. She was a beta, immaculately dressed, and she surveyed my peeling walls and second-hand furniture with the expression of someone who had accidentally stepped in something unpleasant. "The Hayashi family is seeking an omega of appropriate lineage for their eldest son," she explained, perching on the edge of my one chair like it might give her a disease. "Your maternal bloodline qualifies. The arrangement would be beneficial. Your debts would be eliminated. All medical expenses covered, including proper suppressant therapy. A personal stipend. In exchange, marriage, public appearances, and in time, an heir. She said it like she was reading a menu. 1 Omega, lightly used, family name still serviceable, will breed for full debt relief and premium health care. I'd like to meet him first, I said, because I still had some self-respect, however threadbare. Mrs. Ito looked genuinely surprised. That can be arranged. The engagement dinner was at the Hayashi estate in Medina. I took 3 buses to get there. I wore the only suit I owned, a navy blazer from Goodwill with slightly too long sleeves that I tried to fix with safety pins. I looked like exactly what I was, someone who didn't belong anywhere near a zip code like this. The house was enormous. Traditional Japanese architecture woven into Pacific Northwest modernism. Gardens that looked like paintings. A koi pond that probably had a higher net worth than I did. I was seated at a table with 8 members of the Hayashi family, all of them alpha except one elderly Omega grandmother in the corner who watched everything with eyes like polished obsidian. And then Kieran arrived. I felt him before I saw him. His alpha pheromones entered the room like a change in weather, a warm pressure front rolling in from the coast. Smoky amber and black tea, rich and complex and layered, the kind of scent that didn't just register, it colonized. It moved into your lungs and made itself at home, and you realized with a start that you'd been holding your breath, waiting for exactly this scent your entire life. My Omega instincts, battered and suppressed and half dead from years of cheap medication, woke up all at once and said, "Oh, there you are." And then his thoughts hit. Another arrangement, another transaction dressed up in formal wear. I am so exhausted. Father wants an heir, the board wants stability, everyone wants something from me, and I just want one evening where someone sees Kieran instead of Hayashi International's succession plan. Is that too much to ask? Apparently, yes. Let's see the Omega. Probably another smiling sycophant who'll pretend to be charmed while mentally calculating my net worth. God, I'm tired. Then he saw me. Oh. A full stop in his thoughts. A silence so complete I thought the ability had shorted out. Then flooding back like a dam breaking. Oh no. No, no, no. Look at him. His eyes. Those eyes. Dark and serious and a little bit afraid and absolutely breathtaking. And his scent, oh God. Vanilla and old paper and something warm underneath, like honey left in the sun. He smells like a bookstore on a rainy day. He smells like the inside of my favorite memory. He is the most beautiful person I have ever seen, and I am in catastrophic trouble. Don't stare. Do not stare. You are Kieran Hayashi. You do not stare at Omegas across dinner tables like a lovesick schoolboy. Sit down. Be professional. Do not think about the way the candlelight is catching his cheekbone. Do not. He sat down across from me with the controlled precision of a man defusing a bomb. His face was perfectly composed, calm, almost bored. The flawless alpha mask that every business magazine in the country had photographed. "Sora Tanaka," I said, extending my hand. He took it. His grip was careful, warm, like he was holding something breakable. "Kieran Hayashi." His scent is on my hand now. It transferred when we touched. I am never washing this hand. That is an insane thought. I am an insane person. Focus on dinner. Focus on the merger logistics. Do not focus on the fact that his suit doesn't fit properly, which means no one bought it for him, which means no one is taking care of him. And that thought makes me want to set fire to the concept of money, because how is it possible that I have billions and this man is wearing safety pins in his sleeves. He'd noticed the pins. Of course he had. Because Kieran Hayashi noticed everything about me from the first second, even when his mouth pretended I didn't exist. Dinner was a negotiation. Takeshi Hayashi, Kieran's father, ran through the terms with the warmth of an accountant filing a tax return. Debts cleared, suppressant therapy funded, stipend provided, medical care for any omega-related conditions. In return, marriage, public duties, and a child. Takeshi's thoughts, when they reached me, made my skin crawl. The omega is adequate, good cheekbones, healthy enough. The Tanaka name will satisfy the board's traditional faction. He'll produce an heir within the year if Kieran does his duty. After that, the omega can be managed. Managed. Like furniture. Like a project. Like a thing. But the grandmother at the end of the table, the tiny omega with the obsidian eyes, her thoughts were different. She was looking at me with something I hadn't encountered in a long time. Recognition. She was thinking, this boy has been hungry for a long time. Not just for food. For someone to see him. The way Kieran is looking at him when he thinks no one notices. I haven't seen that look since his grandfather first saw me across a room in Kyoto, 50 years ago. Maybe this arrangement will be more than business after all. I clung to that thought like a life raft. After dinner, Kieran walked me to the car the family had sent. We stood in the driveway under a canopy of Japanese maples, their leaves red against the night sky. I want to be honest with you, he said, his eyes fixed somewhere over my left shoulder. This arrangement is a business necessity. I don't expect anything personal from you. You'll have your own space, your own life. I won't intrude. His mouth delivered the speech like a corporate press release. His mind was screaming. Tell him the truth. Tell him you haven't been able to think straight since he walked in. Tell him his scent is still on your hand and you're going to lie awake tonight thinking about it. Tell him you noticed the safety pins and it made you want to buy every clothing store in Seattle and lay the contents at his feet. Tell him something real. Anything real. Please, Kieran, just once in your miserable, performative life, say what you actually feel. He said nothing else, just opened my car door with quiet courtesy and watched me drive away. I pressed my face against the cool glass of the car window, my breath fogging the view of his retreating figure, and thought, I'm going to marry this man. Not because I want to, but because if I don't, I'll be dead from medical debt within 2 years, and at least this way, one of us gets what they want, even if he doesn't know how to ask for it. The wedding was 3 weeks later, 300 guests, the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. I wore a suit the Hayashi stylist chose. It was the most expensive thing that had ever touched my body, and I felt like a fraud in every stitch. At the altar, Kieran's hand found mine, and his thoughts dissolved into something that almost made me stumble. His hand is shaking. Not as much as at the dinner. Is he less afraid? Am I the reason? Please, let me be the reason. I want to be the reason someone stops being afraid. I've never wanted that before. I've never wanted anything before the way I want this man to feel safe. What is happening to me? With this ring, I bind my house to yours, he said, his voice perfectly steady. You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met, his mind said, and I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you without ever telling you why. The audience applauded. The photographers fired. Kieran pressed a mechanical kiss to my cheek, his lips there and gone so fast it barely registered on skin, but detonated in his thoughts like a bomb. His skin, like touching sunlight. I want to kiss him properly. I want to cradle his face in my hands and kiss him until neither of us can breathe. But this is an arrangement, and he didn't choose me. He chose survival, and I will not take advantage of a man who had no other options. I will not be that kind of alpha, even if it kills me, even if wanting him and not having him is the thing that finally breaks me. We drove to the penthouse in silence, my new home. 42nd floor overlooking Puget Sound. Beautiful, enormous, cold as a museum. Your room is this way, Kieran said, leading me to a suite on the opposite end of the apartment from his. If you need anything, call Priya. He left. The door closed. I sat on a bed that cost more than my yearly income and pressed my palms against my eyes. The first month was an exercise in controlled distance. Kieran left before dawn, returned after 9, communicated through his assistant. We existed on opposite ends of a penthouse that could have held 4 families, orbiting each other like strangers in an airport. But I heard everything. His morning thoughts while pouring coffee. I wonder if Sora is warm enough. His room faces east. The sunrise might wake him. I should get blackout curtains installed, not because I lie awake wondering if he's sleeping well, just practically. It's a practical concern. I am a practical person who thinks about his husband's sleep quality at 5:30 in the morning. Practically. His evening thoughts when he caught my scent in the kitchen. Vanilla and old paper. He was here. He was in the kitchen. He used the stove. He's eating real food instead of that instant ramen that makes me want to commit crimes against the instant noodle industry. Good. Good. This is the best part of my day, walking in and knowing he exists in this space. Is that pathetic? That's pathetic. I'm a 31-year-old alpha worth $4 billion, and the highlight of my day is smelling evidence that my husband made eggs. His midnight thoughts as he passed my bedroom door. Good night, Sora. Sleep well. I hope you're dreaming about something that makes you smile. If I could choose your dreams, I'd fill them with libraries and warm kitchens and someone who loves you properly. Someone braver than me, every night, without fail. A whispered good night through a door he never opened. I kept my library job. When Priya mentioned delicately that I didn't need to work, I told her the library was non-negotiable. It was the only place the noise went quiet, the only place that was mine before Kieran and would be mine after, because I wasn't fool enough to believe this arrangement was forever, no matter what his thoughts promised. The shift started with books. I left a novel on the kitchen counter one morning. When I came home, it hadn't moved. But Kieran's thoughts that evening told me he'd picked it up, read the back cover, looked up the author, and ordered their complete works. He reads Ogawa. Of course he reads Ogawa. Quiet devastation dressed in precise language. Just like him. I want to know every book he's ever loved. I want to build a library of everything that matters to him and memorize each page and then casually reference something obscure just to see if his eyes light up. Is that stalking? That's probably stalking. It's definitely not normal alpha behavior. But nothing about the way I feel about Sora Tanaka has been normal since the moment I smelled vanilla and old paper across a dinner table and lost the ability to think in straight lines. I started leaving different books out, testing, mapping his tastes through his reactions. He loved poetry. He'd read Soseki's Kokoro 7 times. He had opinions about narrative structure that were so passionate they bled through even when he was in the shower, a muffled broadcast of literary criticism and steaming water that made me smile against my will. Then came the onigiri evening, the night I accidentally made Kieran Hayashi fall apart. I was in the kitchen making my mother's recipe, rice warm in my hands, nori crackling as I shaped each piece. It was the most at home I'd felt since moving in. My mother's recipe. My hands doing what her hands taught them. the scent of sesame and seaweed, filling a space that finally felt like it could be mine. Kieran came home early. I heard the door, heard his footsteps stop dead. He's cooking. His hands are in rice. There is a grain of rice on his cheek. One single grain of rice on the left side of his face, and I would trade my entire company, every share, every building, every cent, for the right to brush it off with my thumb. This is what home is supposed to feel like. I didn't know. I've lived in this apartment for 6 years, and I didn't know until this exact moment that it was empty. "Would you like some?" I asked without turning around, because looking at him while hearing that would have ended me. Silence. Then, with the careful neutrality of a man negotiating a hostage situation with his own emotions, I wouldn't want to impose. "You live here, Kieran." He sat. He ate 4 onigiri. He did not speak. His thoughts were a single sustained note of happiness so pure and so startled that I had to grip the counter to stay upright. After that, the kitchen became ours. I cooked. He appeared. Gravity did the rest. We talked about books, about Seattle, about weather and architecture, and everything except the fact that his thoughts were a love letter and his mouth was a locked vault, and I was the only person in the world who knew the combination. But I was keeping a secret that would eventually burn us both, and the cracks in my armor were widening every day. The distance between us was narrowing without either of us acknowledging it. Kieran started coming home earlier, timing his arrival to when I'd be cooking. He'd sit at the island and pretend to work on his laptop while his thoughts cataloged every movement I made. The way he holds the knife. Confident, not showy. He learned from someone he loved. The way the steam from the rice maker makes his hair curl slightly at his temples. I am losing my mind over kitchen humidity. This is who I am now. A man undone by steam. We were orbiting closer, pulled by something neither of us could name, and the gravity was getting harder to resist. Then came the charity benefit, a tech industry event where Kieran was presenting, and I was expected to attend as his spouse. I'd been cornered at the bar by a real estate alpha named Endo, 3 drinks deep and loud enough that nearby conversations had quieted. "The Hayashi Omega," Endo said, looking me up and down with a kind of appraising stare that made my skin crawl. His pheromones were sharp cedar and cigarette smoke, deliberately invasive. Pretty face, quiet, the compliant type. I told Takeshi he should have gone with the Watanabe option, but I can see the appeal. His thoughts were revolting. Things I refused to repeat. Things that reduced me to anatomy and compliance and a value measured in what I could provide on my knees. I was frozen. My omega instincts, still raw from the heat, screamed conflicting signals. Submit, flee, fight. I couldn't do any of them. The old programming took over, the one that years of poverty and invisibility had coded into my body. Make yourself small. Don't cause trouble. Then Kieran appeared behind me. I felt his pheromones before his body, smoky amber rolling in like a storm front, displacing Endo's scent completely. His hand came to rest on the small of my back. Warm, firm, unmistakably possessive. The first time he'd ever touched me in public. Endo. Kieran's voice was the kind of calm that preceded detonation. 5 seconds to remove yourself from my husband's personal space before I remove you from this building. Endo's alpha pheromones flared in reflexive challenge, then withered. The scent differential was laughable. Endo was a candle. Kieran was a wildfire. Just making conversation, Hayashi. Your conversation is over. And if I hear you've spoken to any Omega in this room using that tone again, the Bellevue property discrepancy my team flagged during the quarterly audit will reach the Pacific Real Estate Board by morning. Are we clear? Endo vanished into the crowd. Kieran's hand stayed on my back. I felt the tremor in his fingers, the barely contained fury. Are you okay? His voice softened instantly. Did he touch you? No, just words. I'm fine. It's not fine. His jaw was steel. None of that was fine. His thoughts were raw. I want to take him home. I want to close the door and stand between him and every alpha who has ever looked at him like something to be consumed. He is not quiet or compliant or broken. He is brave and stubborn and so much stronger than anyone in this room knows. Let's go home, I said, because staying meant risking something I wasn't ready for. In the car, his hand found mine, tight, silent. His thoughts a litany of protection and fury and something hungry and barely restrained. That night, standing in the hallway between our bedrooms, we looked at each other across 15 feet of hardwood floor, and his thoughts said, if I kiss him right now, I will not stop, and I am terrified that if I start, I will never want anything else. I walked to my room, closed the door, pressed my back against it. Good night, Sora, he whispered through the wall. Good night, Kieran, I whispered back. We were so close, so impossibly close to something real. And what I didn't know was that we were also running out of time. The first spark came at the corporate gala 6 weeks in, when Victor Chen decided to destroy my husband and started by coming for me. Victor was the kind of alpha who used his pheromones like a weapon. Sharp, acrid, intentionally overwhelming. Where Kieran's scent was complex warmth, smoky amber, and black tea that made you want to lean closer, Victor's was cold metal and ozone, the scent equivalent of a knife at your throat. He found me alone at the bar. Kieran was giving a speech across the ballroom, 300 people between us. You know what I love about arrangements like yours? Victor said, standing close enough that his pheromones pressed against mine, a deliberate dominance display that made every Omega instinct I had want to fold inward like a fist. Everyone knows the truth, that the Omega is just a prop, a pretty face the family bought to keep up appearances. My hands trembled. The old tremor, the one from years of bad suppressants, surging back under stress. But here's the thing, he continued, his smile wide and empty. Props can be replaced. And after next week, when Hayashi International is in ruins, your husband won't need a prop anymore. He won't need anything, because I'm going to take everything he has. But his words weren't what stopped my heart. His thoughts were. The data breach drops in 6 days. 200 terabytes of proprietary research sold to Zheng Industries for $18 million. The board will demand Kieran's head. Takeshi will strip his authority to save face. And the Omega, the little charity case from the noodle shop, he'll be back on the street where he belongs. Maybe I'll send him a job application. Something in service. He'd look good on his knees. The cruelty was so specific, so calculated, that I nearly dropped my glass. Not just corporate sabotage, personal destruction. Victor wanted Kieran broken, and he wanted me humiliated for sport. I excused myself to the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold my phone. 6 days. I had 6 days to tell Kieran about the data breach, about Victor's plan, about everything. But telling him meant revealing my ability, meant admitting I'd been hearing his most private, intimate, agonized thoughts for 6 weeks and never said a word. Meant watching the only person who'd ever looked at me with tenderness realize I'd violated his deepest privacy every single day of our marriage. He would never forgive me. But if I stayed silent, he would lose everything. I chose silence, and that choice would haunt me for the rest of my life. The week that followed was torture. I walked through each day knowing the clock was ticking, knowing I held the information that could save Kieran's company, knowing I was too much of a coward to speak. I told myself I'd find another way. I researched corporate espionage, data security, tried to figure out if there was something I could anonymously report. Nothing worked. The specifics were in Victor's head, nowhere else. No paper trail, no evidence. Just thoughts I shouldn't have heard and couldn't prove. 6 days became 5, then 4, then 3, and still I said nothing. Instead, I cooked. I made elaborate meals, filling the kitchen with warmth and scent, like I could somehow stockpile enough good memories to survive what was coming. Kieran ate everything I made with that quiet, devastating gratitude that lived only in his thoughts. And every bite felt like a betrayal, because I was feeding him kindness while letting him walk toward a cliff. On the 5th night, my heat hit. It wasn't supposed to come for another 2 weeks. The new suppressants Kieran's doctor had prescribed were high quality, properly calibrated. But stress accelerates omega cycles, and I had been carrying enough stress to power a small city. I woke at 4 in the morning, drenched in sweat, my skin so sensitive that the sheets felt like sandpaper. My scent, usually muted and controlled, was flooding the room in waves. Vanilla and warm honey and something desperate underneath that I couldn't contain. I managed to text Kieran, heat starting early, staying in my room. His reply came in 40 seconds. Dr. O'Hara on the way. What do you need? His thoughts came faster. Heat. He's going into heat. Alone. In a room 30 feet from mine. His scent is already seeping under his door, and it is, God, it's the most incredible thing I've ever... No. Stop. He needs help. Not an alpha losing control. Dr. O'Hara. Suppressant adjustment. Fluids. Recovery supplies. Focus on logistics. Do not focus on the fact that his scent is making your hands shake and your chest ache, and every alpha instinct you possess is howling at you to go to him right now. The heat lasted 4 days. 4 days of fever and need and loneliness so profound it felt like drowning. I built a nest from every soft thing in the room, curled in the center of it, and rode out waves that turned my body into a battleground. And every single night, Kieran sat on the floor outside my door. I heard him arrive the first evening, heard him slide down the wall, heard the soft thud as his head tipped back against the plaster. His thoughts were an all-night vigil. He's in there alone. I can hear small sounds through the door. He's trying to be quiet because he doesn't want to burden me. He's been suffering alone his entire life, and his first instinct, even now, is to make himself smaller, quieter, less trouble. If I could go back in time, if I could find every person who taught him he was a burden, I don't know what I'd do, but it wouldn't be legal. All I can do now is sit here, be close, let him feel my scent through the door. Even if he doesn't know I'm here, even if he never knows. I'm here, Sora. I'm not leaving. Around 2 in the morning, the worst of a wave, I crawled to the door and pressed my palm flat against the wood. Are you there? I whispered, too wrecked for pride. I'm here. His voice was strained, rough. His alpha pheromones were seeping under the door too, warm amber and black tea, and my body reached for them instinctively, pressing closer to the gap. "You don't have to stay." "I know. I'm staying anyway." His thoughts. I would sit outside this door every night for the rest of my life. I would sleep on this floor, grow old on this floor, die on this floor, if it meant he knew he wasn't alone. I cried, silently, my face pressed against the door, because the man on the other side was breaking my heart with devotion he refused to speak aloud. And I was letting him. And I didn't deserve any of it, because in 2 days his company would be destroyed, and I could have stopped it. When the heat finally broke, I emerged looking like a disaster. Tangled hair, shaking legs, wearing mismatched clothes. The kitchen counter was covered in recovery food, arranged with precision that bordered on obsession. Bone broth, congee with 6 toppings, fresh fruit cut into small pieces, electrolyte drinks, a specific brand of ginger tea that I'd mentioned liking once in a phone call to my coworker, a call Kieran shouldn't have overheard. He was at the island, dark circles under his eyes, rumpled, the unmistakable exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in 4 days. His eyes swept over me, and his mask cracked for one unguarded second. Relief so profound it looked like pain. Hunger so fierce it made his jaw tremble. And underneath, something raw and terrified. "He's okay. He's standing. He's here." I want to carry him to the couch and hold him until the shaking stops. I want to press my face against his neck and breathe him in until his scent is the only thing I know. But I can't. I can't. This is an arrangement. "You should eat," he said, his voice clinical. "Dr. O'Hara recommends protein and hydration in the first 24 hours. I sat down. I ate the food he'd prepared. Every bite tasted like devotion, and every swallow carried the weight of what I hadn't told him. 2 days later, the data leaked. Wow, you've made it this far. If you're enjoying the story and still haven't subscribed, please take a second to do so. It means a lot. Also, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from. All right, let's get back to the story. 200 terabytes of Hayashi International's proprietary research appeared on the open market on a Wednesday morning. By noon, the stock had dropped 14%. By evening, 3 board members were calling for Kieran's resignation. By midnight, the man who had sat outside my door for 4 days during my heat had locked himself in his study, and the only thing coming through the wall was a silence so complete it frightened me more than any scream. When his thoughts finally surfaced, they were nothing I recognized. Find the leak, contain the damage, rally the institutional shareholders, get Thompson on the phone, get legal on the second line. Do not think about Sora. Do not think about the kitchen or the onigiri or the way he looked at me when the heat broke. Focus. This is what happens when you let yourself get distracted. This is what wanting someone costs. This is what softness gets you. The Kieran who emerged from that study was a different person. The gentle undercurrent that had run beneath his thoughts for 2 months, the running commentary of care and longing and secret devotion, went dark. In its place was something cold and mechanical. A CEO in crisis mode, stripped of everything human. He stopped eating my food, stopped coming to the kitchen, stopped existing in any room I occupied. He worked 20-hour days, came home after I was asleep, left before I woke, communicated through the invisible wall between us, the one his secret thoughts had been slowly dissolving, rebuilt itself overnight, and this time it was reinforced with steel. His thoughts, when they came through, were brutal in their efficiency. Board meeting at 9. Victor has 3 boats locked. Father won't back me publicly because supporting a son in crisis is politically inconvenient for the great Takeshi Hayashi. What else is new? Focus on the institutional shareholders. They care about recovery plans, not family politics. Do not think about the fact that Sora left onigiri on the counter this morning with a note that said, "Please eat." Do not think about that note. Do not think about his handwriting, which is slightly uneven because his hands still shake from years of bad suppressants. Do not eat the onigiri. He didn't eat them. I found them untouched that evening and threw them away, and the small violence of dropping his favorite food into the trash felt like a preview of what was coming. Then Victor struck at me directly. I was at the library on a Tuesday when a man in a gray suit approached the circulation desk. Beta, polished, carrying a leather folder. His thoughts announced him before his words did. Seattle Chronicle. Chen's people gave us the lead. Rags to riches angle first. Gold digger pivot second. They want the Omega publicly humiliated. Sora Tanaka, he said. I'm with the Seattle Chronicle. I'd like to ask you some questions about your background. My blood froze. I have no comment. Are you aware that before your marriage, you were a registered client of the Cascade Omega Relief Fund? That's a public charity providing suppressants and medical care to indigent Omegas. He opened the folder showing printouts. My name, my case file number, photos of the noodle shop apartment. Interesting that the husband of one of the wealthiest men in the country was recently classified as destitute. His thoughts filled in the rest. The personal angle is the real story. Father died in a care facility while the kid was at work. Couldn't even afford to be there when the old man passed. 3 jobs, barely surviving, then boom, a billionaire proposes and suddenly he's living in a penthouse. Readers will eat this up. Chen wants it on the front page by Thursday. I told him to leave. He did, already composing the headline in his mind. The story ran 2 days later. From charity case to penthouse, inside Hayashi heir's convenience marriage. They had everything. My father's medical records, my employment history, the noodle shop address, photos of me entering the library in clothes that cost nothing, contrasted with photos of me at the Hayashi Gala in clothes that cost thousands. The message was clear. Gold digger. Fraud. An Omega who'd traded his name for a meal ticket. The comments were a special kind of cruelty. People I'd never met dissecting my worth, my motives, my right to exist in Kieran's world. Charity Omega plays above his station. How many suppressant doses did it take to land a billionaire? Bet the arrangement has an expiration date. Once the heir's born, the Omega goes back to the noodle shop. I sat on the bathroom floor of the penthouse, the same cold tile where I'd knelt crying weeks ago, and read every comment. I couldn't stop. It was like pressing a bruise, the compulsive need to confirm that yes, it really did hurt that much. And from Kieran's study, his thoughts, when they finally reached me, were the ones that broke me. He should have told me about the charity registration, about the debt, the extent of it, about his life before this. Did he think I'd judge him? Or was he ashamed? The article makes him look desperate. It makes our marriage look like a rescue mission. And maybe it was. Maybe he only said yes because he was drowning. Maybe every moment I thought was real. The onigiri, the books, the way he looked at me after the gala. Maybe none of it was real for him. Maybe it was just gratitude, survival, an Omega doing what he had to do to keep breathing. No. He was wrong. He was so devastatingly, catastrophically wrong that the truth nearly tore out of me right there. I wanted to smash through his study door and scream that I stayed for the midnight thoughts, for the good nights whispered through walls, for the man who sat on a cold floor for 4 days because he couldn't bear the thought of me being alone. I stayed because his thoughts were the first thing in years that made me feel like a person instead of an invoice. But I couldn't tell him that without telling him everything. And then the separation papers appeared. I found them on the kitchen counter the next morning, a legal folder with Kieran's handwriting on a note clipped to the front. I'm sorry, this isn't what I wanted, but it's what's best for both of us. The terms protect your interests. Take whatever time you need. I read the terms. He'd given me everything. Continued debt coverage, my father's medical bills permanently settled, a stipend generous enough to finish my degree, buy an apartment, live without fear. He was paying me to leave. And the generosity of it told me exactly what it meant. This wasn't punishment. This was a man who loved someone so much he was willing to shatter himself to set them free. I set the folder down. I walked to the bathroom. I locked the door. And I sank to the floor and cried until my body had nothing left. But this time, through the wall, I heard nothing, because Kieran wasn't home. He'd left the papers and disappeared, too afraid to be in the apartment when I found them. Too afraid to hear me react. Too afraid that if he saw my face, he wouldn't be able to go through with it. I lay on that tile floor for 2 hours, shivering, empty, staring at the ceiling and doing the math that omegas like me always do. The survival math. Where would I go? Back to the noodle shop? Back to 3 jobs and cheap suppressants and a life measured in shifts and pennies? And then, underneath the despair, something older and fiercer clawed its way to the surface. No, I was not going to let this happen. I was not going to let Victor Chen's cruelty and Kieran's fear and my own cowardice destroy the only real thing I'd ever had. I had spent 26 years being invisible, being silent, letting other people's decisions determine my fate. I had buried both my parents, survived poverty that should have killed me, endured a gift I never asked for that let me hear the unfiltered truth of people's hearts. And the truth of Kieran Hayashi's heart was that he loved me desperately, clumsily, silently, with every thought in his brilliant, terrified mind. I was not going to let him throw that away because he was too scared to say it out loud. I got off the floor. I washed my face. I made tea, 2 cups, and sat at the kitchen island with the separation papers between them. And I waited. Kieran came home at 11. He expected an empty apartment. Instead, he found me. The look on his face, hope and dread in equal measure, fighting for control of features that had been schooled into blankness since childhood. Sit down, I said. He sat. His thoughts were a hurricane. He didn't sign it. Why is he still here? What is he going to say? Whatever it is, let me survive hearing it, please. I have survived hostile takeovers and boardroom coups and my father's contempt for 31 years. Let me survive this. I'm not signing this, I said. Sora, the situation with the company, the article. It's become clear that this arrangement— Stop! My voice came out harder than I'd ever used it with him. Stop calling it an arrangement. Stop calling what we have a business transaction. Stop hiding behind contracts and paperwork because you're too terrified to say what you actually feel. His mask cracked. a flash of raw pain before he rebuilt it. You don't know what I feel. Yes, I do. I took a breath that felt like swallowing glass. I know exactly what you feel, Kieran, because I can hear your thoughts. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever experienced. I've been able to hear them since the night we met, I continued, because stopping now would be worse than going on. I heard you at the engagement dinner. I heard you at the altar. I heard you buy 7 coats before I moved in because you were afraid I'd be cold. I heard you sit outside my door for 4 nights during my heat because you couldn't stand the thought of me alone. I heard every single thought you've had about my onigiri, my books, my cheekbones, and the grain of rice that one time. And I heard you, night after night, whisper goodnight through my door and then walk away because you thought you didn't have the right to knock. Kieran stood up so fast the stool shrieked against the floor. He walked to the window, pressed both palms flat against the glass, and stood there with his back to me, his shoulders rigid, his pheromones spiking so sharply that the air in the kitchen changed pressure. Smoky amber burning hot, the scent of an alpha in emotional freefall. Everything, he said. Not a question, a verdict. Everything. Every thought I believed was private. Every feeling I thought I was protecting. Yes. For 4 months. Yes. His forehead touched the glass. His reflection stared back at him, and I watched his composure finally, completely disintegrate. And you never told me. His voice cracked on the last word. You heard me falling in love with you in real time, and you just, what? Listened? I was afraid. I was afraid that if you knew, you'd shut down completely, that I'd lose the real you, the one underneath, and be left with just the mask. He turned, and I saw tears on Kieran Hayashi's face. The most composed, controlled, impenetrable alpha I'd ever known, crying in his own kitchen because the person he loved had been inside his walls the entire time. I also need to tell you something else, I said, because the night was already ruined and the only way forward was through. Victor Chen is the one who leaked the Osaka data. I heard it in his thoughts at the board reception. He planned it 6 days before it happened. He told me to my face that he was going to destroy you, and I heard every detail of how in his mind. The server locations, the buyer, the amount. And I didn't tell you. I chose to protect my secret instead of protecting you, and it nearly cost you your company. The temperature in the room dropped, not figuratively. Kieran's pheromones shifted from grief to something I'd never sensed from him before. Cold, sharp, precise. The scent of an alpha whose protective instincts had just locked onto a target. Victor spoke to you directly. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. At the gala, when I was giving the speech, he stood so close, his pheromones were pressing against mine. He called me a prop. He said I'd look good on my knees. Something snapped. I'd heard stories about alpha rage before, about pheromone surges so powerful they could force an entire room into submission. I'd thought they were exaggerated, the kind of thing omegas whispered about but never actually witnessed. They weren't. Kieran's pheromones erupted in a wave so powerful that my omega instincts nearly dropped me. Not threatening, not aimed at me, but the sheer force of an alpha in full protective fury was like standing in the path of a forest fire. The air pressure changed. My ears popped. Every glass on the counter rattled. His thoughts were a single white-hot line. Victor Chen touched my husband with his pheromones. He stood close enough to intimidate him. He called him a prop. He told him he'd look good on his knees. Victor Chen is going to lose everything. His position, his company, his reputation, his ability to exist in any room that matters. I am going to dismantle his life with the same precision he used to try to dismantle mine. And when I'm finished, his name will be a cautionary tale that alphas whisper to their children about what happens when you touch something that belongs to Kieran Hayashi. His spoken words were calmer than his thoughts, but not by much. I need the details. Everything you heard, every specific. I'll tell you all of it, but Kieran, I need you to hear me first. I didn't stay because of the money. I didn't stay because I was desperate and you were convenient. I stayed because you are the only person who has ever made me feel like I exist. Your thoughts didn't make me pity you. They made me love you. I love you, Kieran. Not the CEO, not the Hayashi heir. The man who sits outside doors and buys too many coats and thinks onigiri are the most beautiful food on earth. I love him. And I should have told you all of this months ago. He stood across the kitchen, tears still wet on his face, pheromones still filling the room like a storm system. And I watched the war happen behind his eyes. The fury about Victor, the hurt of my betrayal, the staggering, terrifying vulnerability of being fully seen by someone for the first time in his life. Then he crossed the distance between us, slowly, deliberately, giving me time to retreat. I didn't move. He stopped inches away. His hand came up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The same gesture from 100 secret thoughts, now made real. You heard me, he said, his voice wrecked. Every stupid, desperate, embarrassing thought. Every single one. And you still love me. More because of them, not despite. Something in his chest released. I heard it, felt it, a thought that wasn't formed in words but in pure emotion, relief and fear and love so enormous it could barely fit inside one person. He kissed me. Not the mechanical brush from our wedding. This was the kiss he'd been imagining for 4 months, the one that lived in his midnight thoughts, and it was devastating. His hand cradled my face like I was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. His pheromones wrapped around me, warm and complex, and finally open. And my omega instincts, starved for exactly this for 26 years, responded with a certainty that felt like coming home. When we broke apart, foreheads pressed together, his thoughts and his words aligned for the first time. I love you, he said, out loud, in his actual voice, to my actual face. I have loved you since you smelled like vanilla in a room that smelled like obligation. And I am so angry at you right now. And I am so in love with you right now. And I'm going to need some time to figure out how both of those things can be true at once. Take all the time you need, I whispered. I'm not going anywhere. Damn right you're not. He kissed me again, harder this time, and his thought said, mine. Not an arrangement, not a transaction. Mine. Victor Chen's destruction took 12 days. Kieran worked with a focus that I'd heard in his thoughts but never seemed directed outward like this. He used every detail I provided. The server locations, the buyer identity, the financial trail, and built a case so airtight that Victor's own lawyers told him to settle. But Kieran didn't want a settlement. He wanted obliteration. The emergency board meeting was standing room only. I sat in the back row at Kieran's request, the first time he'd ever wanted me at a business function as more than decoration. He presented the evidence with surgical precision. Server logs, offshore payment records, communication trails that led directly to Victor's personal devices. When Victor, red-faced and desperate, demanded to know how Kieran had obtained such specific intelligence, Kieran looked at him across the conference table with an expression that made 3 board members physically lean back in their chairs. "Because I protect what's mine," he said. "Something you will never understand." Victor was escorted from the building by security. The board voted unanimously to strip his position, freeze his assets, and pursue criminal charges. He was arrested 3 days later. But it was what happened after the meeting that the business world would talk about for years. Kieran walked out of the boardroom, past the executives and lawyers and shareholders who were still processing what they'd just witnessed, straight to where I was sitting in the back row. 300 people watching. He took my hand, lifted it to his lips, kissed my knuckles with a deliberateness that turned a private gesture into a public declaration. Then, to the room at large, in a voice that carried, "If anyone in this company, on this board, or in this industry has something to say about my husband, I invite them to say it directly to me, and then to my legal team, in that order." The silence was absolute. Then Obachan, who had somehow materialized in the second row, began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, the sound echoed in the stunned quiet, and one by one, others joined, until the entire room was applauding, and I was sitting there with tears streaming down my face and Kieran's hand warm around mine. His thoughts, for the first time, were quiet, not suppressed, not hidden, just peaceful. This is what it feels like, to stop hiding, to let them see. It doesn't feel weak at all. It feels like the strongest thing I've ever done. Takeshi's reckoning came at the next family dinner. When the elder Hayashi began discussing succession timelines, Kieran set down his chopsticks. "Father, I'd like you to apologize to Sora for what you said about the Watanabe daughter, and for the Chronicle article, which I know you facilitated." The table went silent. Takeshi's expression was granite. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying, I'm stating. You leaked Sora's charity registration and financial history to a reporter to pressure the succession timeline. I have the email chain. Would you like me to share it with the family, or would you prefer to apologize?" Takeshi looked at his son, then at me, then at Obachan, who was studying her rice with the serene expression of a woman who had been waiting decades for one of her grandsons to grow a backbone. "I acted improperly," Takeshi said, the words extracted from him like teeth. "I apologize." Obachan reached under the table and squeezed my hand. Her thoughts were warm and satisfied. Good boy. Both of them. It took long enough. The months that followed were the rebuilding, not just of the company, but of us. Trust doesn't heal overnight. There were difficult conversations, moments when Kieran went quiet, and I could feel the residual hurt, the knowledge that I'd heard his most vulnerable thoughts and kept that power to myself. Mornings where the weight of my secret sat between us like scar tissue, present, but slowly becoming part of the landscape. But there were also mornings where Kieran would say, unprompted, over coffee, "I was just thinking that you look beautiful in this light," and then pause and smile. "I used to only think that. It's better out loud." He started reading poetry to me in the evenings, out loud. His voice, low and careful, shaping words by Soseki and Basho and Mary Oliver with a tenderness that made my chest physically ache. His thoughts during these readings were quietly triumphant. He's leaning against me. His eyes are closing. He's falling asleep to the sound of my voice. I have wanted this. I have wanted exactly this. And I no longer have to pretend I don't. At a tech industry gala 1 month after Victor's arrest, an alpha approached us at the bar. He glanced at me, then at Kieran, and said with casual condescension, "So this is the Omega from the Chronicle article." Before I could react, Kieran's arm came around my waist. His pheromones shifted, that subtle pressure drop I'd learned to recognize as controlled fury, the room contracting around us. "This is Sora Hayashi." His voice was perfectly calm, perfectly lethal. He manages the community literacy program at the Seattle Public Library. He is the reason my company still exists. He is the most important person in any room he enters, including this one. And if you reference that article again in my presence, I will acquire your company by Friday and have it dissolved by Monday morning. Are we clear? The alpha went white and retreated so fast he nearly tripped. Around us, conversations stuttered and restarted. Phones were subtly raised. By morning, the clip would be everywhere. Kieran's thoughts were calm. Good. Let them all see. Let every person in this industry know that my husband is not to be touched, spoken about, or looked at with anything less than the respect he has earned. I wasted months being afraid of this moment. It's the easiest thing I've ever done. 4 months after our wedding, on a gray Seattle Sunday, Kieran led me to the balcony. The rain was soft against the glass railing. "I want to ask you something," he said. "I can already hear what you're thinking," I reminded him gently. His smile reached his eyes in a way that still made my breath catch. "I know, but I want to say it out loud, because that's who I am now." He pulled a small box from his pocket. A gold band inside, simple and warm, with a wave pattern along the edge. "Marry me again," he said. "Not for our families, not for business, not because of a contract. Because I love you. Because you heard every secret, terrified thought in my head and chose to stay anyway. And I want to spend the rest of my life earning that." "Yes," I said. "Yes." The second wedding was small. Oba-chan's garden, string lights wound through winter branches. My brother Yuto stood beside me, his medical school tuition quietly funded by a husband who did generous things and then pretended they hadn't happened. Mika, Kieran's younger sister, stood beside him. When Kieran kissed me at the altar, it wasn't the mechanical brush from our first ceremony. It was deep, unhurried, the kind of kiss that makes people look away because it feels too private for witnesses. His thoughts and his words were the same thing now. I love you. I love you. I love you. 8 months later, our son was born on a spring morning, healthy, furious, with a grip that made the delivery nurse laugh, and dark eyes already holding his father's intensity. Kieran held him for the first time and went completely, perfectly still. This towering alpha who had dismantled a corporate saboteur faced down his own father and publicly declared war on anyone who disrespected his husband, reduced to absolute silence by a 7-pound infant. His thoughts were a single shining note that I heard clearer than anything I'd ever received. This is everything. Every lonely night, every wall I built, every thought I was afraid to say, it was all leading here. "He has your frown," I said from the bed, exhausted and happy and overflowing. "That's not a frown, that's contemplation." "He's 4 hours old and he already looks like he's reviewing quarterly earnings." Kieran laughed, bright and unguarded, the laugh that used to exist only in his thoughts and now filled entire rooms. He brought the baby to me, settling onto the bed beside us, his arm around my shoulders, our son cradled between us. His scent wrapped around us both, smoky amber and black tea, warm and open and finally, unafraid. "I can hear you," I murmured. "I know." He kissed my temple. "I'm not hiding anymore." Outside, Seattle rain tapped against the hospital windows. Inside, in a room that smelled like new beginnings and old books and the kind of love that starts as silence and learns slowly to become sound, a family that had begun as a transaction was becoming something no contract could define. I'd spent my life hearing other people's thoughts. Millions of words, most of them noise, most of them forgotten the instant they passed through me. But the ones that mattered, the ones I'd carry with me until the day I died, were the ones Kieran Hayashi finally learned to say out loud. And the funny thing about silence is this: it can be a wall, or it can be a door. For 31 years, Kieran used it as a wall. It took a stubborn, scared, broke Omega with a supernatural ability he never asked for to show him it could be something else entirely. A door, always open, leading home. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell us your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time.